Part 1. Vesper. Ignorance covers humanity like a thick wool blanket, with tiny pinpricks of knowledge peeking through here and there. Whenever we manage to connect a few of the dots and form a picture, we think we're pretty hot stuff. And I guess we are. I mean, we've never met anyone who could do it better. But I can't decide if that really means we're good at it, or if it's just a very slow track. I've been around a long time. You think I would have learned something? I don't know. A man starts acting funny when he's run out of options. Thinking becomes a strangely bloated yet pointless exercise. I hadn't worked in 10 months. I hadn't paid my rent in 2. The woman I'd been shacked up with had gotten tired of my scales before I did, and by the time I got tired of them, I was too broke to have my genome reworked. Actually, the scales were probably the start of this current decline. I tried to deduct them as a professional expense. I'm an actor, among other things. And I figured if full body scales didn't constitute a costume, what does? The SRS disagreed, popped me for 4,000 DCU, blocked my net access when I didn't pay, and told Shaughnessy that if she tried to lift with me aboard, they'd impound her ship and arrest her for cultural pollution. I guess they didn't like the show. So Shaughnessy explained to me how much he liked my work and what a great asset to the production I was and how much he hated to lose me, but these things happen, and if I could get this straightened out and hop the next ship to heaven, which was where the tour was going next. And by the way, did I know any actors on Heaven? You know, just someone to fill in until I hooked back up with them. I told her I'd never been to heaven. At that point, it looked like I had as much chance of seeing heaven as a 14th century heretic. I went down to the port to see them off. I don't know why. They punched a hole in the sky and kept on going, and I stayed behind. There is something about watching a starship lift off when you were supposed to be in it that is almost indescribable. So there I was in New Spanaway, a city that is a textbook victim of imperial planetary economics. A prefab metal and plastic blister plopped down in the middle of the jungle on the wrong side of Vesper, which is actually a pretty nice globe. Vesper as a whole has a good balance of trade and tourist business. You've probably heard of it if you've done any traveling in the home worlds. It's the third moon of Golgotha, a huge super Jovian gas giant that was one of the first extrasolar planets to be discovered back around the end of the second millennium. Of course, everyone around here claims it was the first to be discovered, but who believes a bunch of 150-kilo bioengineered syndicants? I mean, you don't disagree with them, but you don't necessarily hang on their every word either. But we happy denizens of New Spanaway were far removed from the pleasure palaces and tourist traps. They're all in the other hemisphere, where Golgotha's cream and rust-banded immensity fills half the sky. No, there's only one place to go in your off hours in Spam Town, and I was in it, looking for a way out. I saw her in the mirror over the bar when she came in from the veranda. She would have been hard to miss. She was over 2 meters tall, long-limbed and slender, and covered from head to toe in sleek silver fur that lengthened into a thick mane on the top and back of her head. Her eyes were large, almond-shaped, and the color of emeralds. No cornea visible, just these 2 liquid pools of green fire split by black cat pupils. She wasn't rich. She must have been at one time. The fur job alone must have set her back a bundle, and I didn't even want to think of what the eyes cost her. She wasn't wearing much more than I was. Not a surprise in the tropics when a person spent that much on her skin, and I should know. But what the hell was she doing here? The contrast between her relaxed, fluid grace and the utilitarian rust of Burb's place was one of those images that can throw into focus the ironies of an entire socioeconomic power structure. She walked past the playpens on her way to the bar, passing through humid shafts of mid-afternoon sunlight that read her body contours like a laser scanner. I tried to look at the bottom of my glass and think about something else. Burbs didn't stare at her, I'll give him that. But then I don't think Burbs had hormonal or pheromonal reactions anymore. He hadn't had them removed or anything, they just eroded away naturally. Her polychrome nails clicked on the teak countertop as she sat down like she owned the guy who paid the guy who paid the guy who made the stool. What'll it be? Burb's voice was like the town he inhabited, a victim of economics. Hers wasn't.
Give me what your scaly friend is having.
I looked at her reflection in the mirror, not just because she'd referred to me. Her voice made me think of warm honey flowing over brass. Reminded me of a singer I'd been in love with a long time ago. He's no friend of mine. Nice guy, Burbs. He turned away to fill a glass with a homebrew I'd been living on for far too long. Turned back to set it down in front of her.
You have a name?
More honey. Made the scales on my arms stand up slightly. I could feel air under them. Burbs looked like Burbs looked at her like he was convincing himself that he was too old and too mated to care that she wanted me instead of him. I'll ask him. He glanced down the bar at me. Hey, lizard, you got a name? I actually look more like a pangolin than a reptile. But when one of the regulars started calling me lizard a couple of months ago, I let it stick. The number of phonemes it shared with loser resonated with my current bout of sardonic fatalism. You couldn't pronounce it, I said into the glass. I was playing for time. In my present state, I couldn't believe that a beautiful, rich, or even ex-rich woman would care if I was breathing, let alone want to know my name. I figured she was from the System Revenue Service, or worse yet, from Planetary Tectonics, here to kick me off the dole and into a job in the works, where Burbs had lost his voice and his right arm and probably his pheromonal reactions.
Not very friendly, is he?
She didn't look at me as she said it. Didn't even look at my reflection. And I tried not to look at her. That voice was really getting to me. Take away the fur, the eyes, the body contours, even the possible wealth. The voice alone would have been enough to make me curl up in her lap. I started to wonder if she had backup outside, if I could squeeze through the window in the can and sprint down the alley before she called her goons. And where the hell would I go then?
Better get him another one of these,
She said as she tapped her nails on the glass. She was buying me a drink? Who was this femme? Burbs looked at her like she might be dangerous. Then he looked at me like I was a slightly embarrassing skin condition. Then back at her. We were the only ones in the place besides a couple of syndicants wired into La La Land and the playpens. She was obviously ready to get down to business. She placed her palm on the softly glowing square inlaid in the teak in front of her. Whatever the readout was on Burbs' monitor, it must have impressed him. He shrugged, filled another glass, and sent it down the bar to me. I stopped it with one hand, turned my head, and looked squarely at her, checking out the veranda in my peripheral vision as I did so. There was the beef, all right. The size of a small mountain. Looked like a primate 3 or maybe even a 4. I couldn't really tell. It was backlit by the sun outside. Jesus, Allah and Vishnu, what had I wandered into? It started to rain. One of those wonderful tropical afternoon cloudbursts where the sun shines right through the fat drops, turning them into millions of fire opals. Didn't seem to bother her pal outside. He didn't move. I hoped the drumming on the roof masked the pounding of my heart. I looked back at her reflection and met her eyes. Her pupils had dilated in the semi-darkness of the bar and were almost round now. They were enormous. Looking into them gave me the strangest sensation, the kind of dynamic equilibrium, like I just stepped off a cliff and there was nothing left to do but enjoy the ride and hope for the best.
Go ahead and drink it. It's paid for.
Which is more than can be said for the 3 I'd already had. I stared into those bottomless eyes for a moment, then dropped my gaze to the brew in front of me so I could think. You see, I was still entertaining the fantasy that I was a free agent, and I was already discovering that thinking was not something I did well while I was looking at her. I opened my mouth to say something like, "What's your game?" or "How did I get so lucky?" But opening my mouth was as far as I got. She wasn't from the SRS or any of the syndicates. Those organizations for the advancement of human degradation might do a lot of things to you, but buying you a drink in the local dive wasn't one of them. The theory that despite her dazzling appearance and apparent wealth, she just couldn't find a boyfriend and was irresistibly drawn to me was just as easy to discard. I knew that somewhere there was a devastatingly incisive verbal riposte that would unmask her and leave her utterly at my mercy, but I couldn't come up with it.
I understand you've been off the net.
She said.
For almost a year. How do you keep so healthy?
I met her eyes in the mirror again. Bad choice. Exercise, I croaked without thinking, and I watch what I eat. She smiled easily and slipped off her stool, leaving her brew untouched. 3 steps brought her next to me. My nostrils filled with her and my pulse rate went up.
Innovative.
She said, then looked over her shoulder at Burbs.
Do you hide the good stuff in the back?
Burbs said, "What do you need?" And she replied,
How about a bottle of 80-year-old brandy?
"Brandy? I don't think it..."
Why don't you go check?
All without taking her eyes off me. Burbs stared dumbly at her back for a minute, then got the idea and disappeared. She put her arms around my neck, brought her lips to my ear, and breathed.
Where can we talk?
I thought furiously as the chills went down my spine. She wanted privacy? This was a factory town. The trades like to know what's going on with their employees. I thought some more. "You been to the beach?" I asked. She smiled and my pulse went up again.
Sounds nice.
"Meet me at the monorail in half an hour."
I can hardly wait.
She kissed my jawline, smiled again, turned and swayed outside into the rain and sunshine. The mountain followed her up the alley. I turned back to the bar and looked at myself in the mirror. Burbs came in after a minute carrying a bottle of something. He looked at me, looked around the place and said, "What'd you do to her?" I continued to look at my reflection as I drained the glass in my hand. Then I turned to him. "Why do they call you Burbs?" I asked. "What? Why do they call you Burbs?" He looked at me for a moment. "I don't know, because I grew up in the burbs, I guess." "What burbs? What do you mean? Which burbs did you grow up in?" He put the bottle down. "You know, the burbs." I looked at my empty glass. "You don't even remember what planet you started on, do you?" He began to wipe down the bar. "What, are you trying to be cute?" he said. And a spear of empathy touched my heart as I realized that he didn't. And that's how the story stopped.